The Manhood of Edward Robinson. With a swing of his mighty arms, Bill lifted her right off her feet, crushing her to his breast. With a deep sigh, she yielded her lips in such a kiss as he had never dreamed of. With a sigh, Mr. Edward Robinson put down When Love is King and stared out of the window of the underground train. They were running through Stamford Brook. Edward Robinson was thinking about Bill. Bill was the real 100% he-man, beloved of lady novelists. Edward envied him his muscles, his rugged good looks, and his terrific passions. He picked up the book again and read the description of the proud Marchesa Bianca, she who had yielded her lips. So ravishing was her beauty, the intoxication of her was so great that strong men went down before her like ninepins, faint and helpless with love. "Of course," said Edward to himself, "it's all bosh, this sort of stuff. All bosh it is. And yet, I wonder." His eyes looked wistful. Was there such a thing as a world of romance and adventure somewhere? Were there women whose beauty intoxicated? Was there such a thing as love that devoured one like a flame? "This is real life, this is," said Edward. "I've got to go on the same, just like all the other chaps." On the whole, he supposed, he ought to consider himself a lucky young man. He had an excellent berth, a clerkship in a flourishing concern. He had good health, no one depended upon him, and he was engaged to Maud. But the mere thought of Maud brought a shadow over his face. Though he would never have admitted it, he was afraid of Maud. He loved her. Yes, he still remembered the thrill with which he had admired the back of her white neck rising out of the cheap 4.11 blouse on the first occasion they had met. He had sat behind her at the cinema, and the friend he was with had known her and had introduced them. No doubt about it, Maud was very superior. She was good-looking and clever and very ladylike, and she was always right about everything. The kind of girl everyone said that would make such an excellent wife. Edward wondered whether the Marchesa Bianca would have made an excellent wife. Somehow he doubted it. He couldn't picture the voluptuous Bianca with her red lips and her swaying form tamely sewing on buttons, say, for the virile Bill. No, Bianca was romance, and this was real life. He and Maud would be very happy together. She had so much common sense. But all the same, he wished that she wasn't quite so, sharp in manner, so prone to jump upon him. It was, of course, her prudence and her common sense which made her do so. Maud was very sensible, and as a rule Edward was very sensible too. But sometimes he had wanted to get married this Christmas, for instance. Maud had pointed out how much more prudent it would be to wait a while, a year or two perhaps. His salary was not large. He had wanted to give her an expensive ring. She had been horror-stricken and had forced him to take it back and exchange it for a cheaper one. Her qualities were all excellent qualities, but sometimes Edward wished that she had more faults and less virtues. It was her virtues that drove him to desperate deeds. For instance, a blush of guilt overspread his face. He had got to tell her, and tell her soon. His secret guilt was already making him behave strangely. Tomorrow was the first of 3 days' holiday, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and Boxing Day. She had suggested that he should come round and spend the day with her people, and in a clumsy, foolish manner, a manner that could not fail to arouse her suspicions, he had managed to get out of it. He had told a long, lying story about a pal of his in the country with whom he had promised to spend the day. And there was no pal in the country. There was only his guilty secret. 3 months ago, Edward Robinson, in company with a few 100,000 other young men, had gone in for a competition in one of the weekly papers. 12 girls' names had to be arranged in order of popularity. Edward had had a brilliant idea. His own preference was sure to be wrong. He had noticed that in several similar competitions. He wrote down the 12 names, arranged in his own order of merit. Then he wrote them down again, this time placing one from the top and one from the bottom of the list alternately. When the result was announced, Edward had got 8 right out of 12 and was awarded the first prize of £500. This result, which might easily be ascribed to luck, Edward persisted in regarding as the direct outcome of his system. He was inordinately proud of himself. The next thing was, what to do with the £500? He knew very well what Maud would say. Invest it. A nice little nest egg for the future. And of course, Maud would be right. He knew that. But to win money as the result of a competition is an entirely different feeling from anything else in the world. Had the money been left to him as a legacy, Edward would have invested it religiously in conversion loan or savings certificates as a matter of course. But money that one has achieved by a mere stroke of the pen, by a lucky and unbelievable chance, comes under the same heading as a child's sixpence, for your very own, to spend as you like. And in a certain rich shop which he passed daily on his way to the office was the unbelievable dream. A small 2-seater car, with a long shining nose, and the price clearly displayed on it, £465. If I were rich, Edward had said to it day after day, if I were rich, I'd have you. And now he was, if not rich, at least possessed of a lump sum of money sufficient to realize his dream. That car, that shining, alluring piece of loveliness, was his if he cared to pay the price. He had meant to tell Maud about the money. Once he had told her, he would have secured himself against temptation. In the face of Maud's horror and disapproval, he would never have the courage to persist in his madness. But as it chanced, it was Maud herself who clinched the matter. He had taken her to the cinema, and to the best seats in the house. She had pointed out to him kindly but firmly the criminal folly of his behaviour, wasting good money, 3 and 6pence against 2 and 4pence, when one saw just as well from the latter places. Edward took her reproaches in sullen silence. Maud felt contentedly that she was making an impression. Edward could not be allowed to continue in these extravagant ways. She loved Edward, but she realized that he was weak. Hers the task of being ever at hand to influence him in the way he should go. She observed his worm-like demeanour with satisfaction. Edward was indeed worm-like. Like worms, he turned. He remained crushed by her words, but it was at that precise minute that he made up his mind to buy the car. "Damn it," said Edward to himself. "For once in my life, I'll do what I like. Maud can go hang." And the very next morning he had walked into that palace of plate glass, with its lordly inmates in their glory of gleaming enamel and shimmering metal, and with an insouciance that surprised himself, he bought the car. It was the easiest thing in the world, buying a car. It had been his for 4 days now. He had gone about outwardly calm, but inwardly bathed in ecstasy. And to Maud he had as yet breathed no word. For 4 days, in his luncheon hour, he had received instruction in the handling of the lovely creature. He was an apt pupil. Tomorrow, Christmas Eve, he was to take her out into the country. He had lied to Maud, and he would lie again if need be. He was enslaved, body and soul, by his new possession. It stood to him for romance, for adventure, for all the things he had longed for and had never had. Tomorrow, he and his mistress would take the road together. They would rush through the keen, cold air, leaving the throb and fret of London far behind, out into wide, clear spaces. At this moment, Edward, though he did not know it, was very near to being a poet. Tomorrow. He looked down at the book in his hand. When Love is King. He laughed and stuffed it into his pocket. The car, and the red lips of the Marchesa Bianca, and the amazing prowess of Bill seemed all mixed up together. Tomorrow. The weather, usually a sorry jade to those who count upon her, was kindly disposed towards Edward. She gave him the day of his dreams, a day of glittering frost and pale blue sky and a primrose-yellow sun. So, in a mood of high adventure, of daredevil wickedness, Edward drove out of London. There was trouble at Hyde Park Corner, and a sad contretemps at Putney Bridge. There was much protesting of gears, and a frequent jarring of brakes, and much abuse was freely showered upon Edward by the drivers of other vehicles. But for a novice, he did not acquit himself so badly, and presently he came out onto one of those fair, wide roads that are the joy of the motorist. There was little congestion on this particular road today. Edward drove on, drunk with his mastery over this creature of the gleaming sides, speeding through the cold white world with the elation of a god. It was a delirious day. He stopped for lunch at an old-fashioned inn, and again later for tea. Then, reluctantly, he turned homewards, back again to London, to Maud, to the inevitable explanation, recriminations. He shook off the thought with a sigh. Let tomorrow look after itself. He still had today. And what could be more fascinating than this? Rushing through the darkness with the headlights searching out the way in front. Why, this was the best of all. He judged that he had no time to stop anywhere for dinner. This driving through the darkness was a ticklish business. It was going to take longer to get back to London than he had thought. It was just 8 o'clock when he passed through Hindhead and came out on the rim of the Devil's Punch Bowl. There was moonlight, and the snow that had fallen 2 days ago was still unmelted. He stopped the car and stood staring. What did it matter if he didn't get back to London until midnight? What did it matter if he never got back? He wasn't going to tear himself away from this at once. He got out of the car and approached the edge. There was a path winding down temptingly near him. Edward yielded to the spell. For the next half hour, he wandered deliriously in a snow-bound world. Never had he imagined anything quite like this. And it was his very own, given to him by his shining mistress who waited for him faithfully on the road above. He climbed up again, got into the car, and drove off, still a little dizzy from that discovery of sheer beauty which comes to the most prosaic of men once in a while. Then, with a sigh, he came to himself and thrust his hand into the pocket of the car where he had stuffed an additional muffler earlier in the day. But the muffler was no longer there. The pocket was empty. No, not completely empty. There was something scratchy and hard, like pebbles. Edward thrust his hand deep down. In another minute he was staring like a man bereft of his senses. The object that he held in his hand, dangling from his fingers, with the moonlight striking 100 fires from it, was a diamond necklace. Edward stared and stared, but there was no doubting possible. A diamond necklace, worth probably thousands of pounds, for the stones were large ones, had been casually reposing in the side pocket of the car. But who had put it there? It had certainly not been there when he started from town. Someone must have come along when he was walking about in the snow and deliberately thrust it in. But why? Why choose his car? Had the owner of the necklace made a mistake? Or could it possibly be a stolen necklace? And then, as all these thoughts went whirling through his brain, Edward suddenly stiffened and went cold all over. This was not his car. It was very like it. Yes, it was the same brilliant shade of scarlet, red as the Marchesa Bianca's lips. It had the same long and gleaming nose, but by 1,000 small signs Edward realized that it was not his car. Its shining newness was scarred here and there. It bore signs, faint but unmistakable, of wear and tear. In that case, Edward, without more ado, made haste to turn the car. Turning was not his strong point. With the car in reverse, he invariably lost his head and twisted the wheel the wrong way. Also, he frequently became entangled between the accelerator and the footbrake with disastrous results. In the end, however, he succeeded, and straight away the car began purring up the hill again. Edward remembered that there had been another car standing some little distance away. He had not noticed it particularly at the time. He had returned from his walk by a different path from that by which he had gone down into the hollow. This second path had brought him out on the road immediately behind, as he had thought, his own car. It must really have been the other one. In about 10 minutes he was once more at the spot where he had halted, but there was now no car at all by the roadside. Whoever had owned this car must now have gone off in Edward's. He also, perhaps, misled by the resemblance. Edward took out the diamond necklace from his pocket and let it run through his fingers perplexedly. What to do next? Run on to the nearest police station? Explain the circumstances? Hand over the necklace? And give the number of his own car? By the way, what was the number of his car? Edward thought and thought, but for the life of him he couldn't remember. He felt a cold, sinking sensation. He was going to look the most utter fool at the police station. There was an 8 in it. That was all he could remember. Of course it didn't really matter, at least. He looked uncomfortably at the diamonds. Supposing they should think... Oh, but they wouldn't. And yet, again, they might. That he had stolen the car, and the diamonds. Because after all, when one came to think of it, would anyone in their senses thrust a valuable diamond necklace carelessly into the open pocket of a car? Edward got out and went round to the back of the motor. Its number was XR 10061. Beyond the fact that that was certainly not the number of his car, it conveyed nothing to him. Then he set to work systematically to search all the pockets. In the one where he had found the diamonds, he made a discovery. A small scrap of paper with some words penciled on it. By the light of the headlights, Edward read them easily enough. Meet me, Green, corner of Salter's Lane, 10 o'clock. He remembered the name Green. He had seen it on a signpost earlier in the day. In a minute, his mind was made up. He would go to this village, Green, find Salter's Lane, meet the person who had written the note, and explain the circumstances. That would be much better than looking a fool in the local police station. He started off almost happily. After all, this was an adventure. This was the sort of thing that didn't happen every day. The diamond necklace made it exciting and mysterious. He had some little difficulty in finding Green, and still more difficulty in finding Salter's Lane, but after knocking up 2 cottages, he succeeded. Still, it was a few minutes after the appointed hour when he drove cautiously along a narrow road, keeping a sharp lookout on the left-hand side, where he had been told Salter's Lane branched off. He came upon it quite suddenly round a bend, and even as he drew up, a figure came forward out of the darkness. "At last!" a girl's voice cried. "What an age you've been, Gerald!" As she spoke, the girl stepped right into the glare of the headlights, and Edward caught his breath. She was the most glorious creature he had ever seen. She was quite young, with hair black as night and wonderful scarlet lips. The heavy cloak that she wore swung open, and Edward saw that she was in full evening dress, a kind of flame-coloured sheath outlining her perfect body. Round her neck was a row of exquisite pearls. Suddenly the girl started. "Why," she cried, "it isn't Gerald." "No," said Edward hastily. "I must explain." He took the diamond necklace from his pocket and held it out to her. "My name is Edward." He got no further, for the girl clapped her hands and broke in. "Edward, of course, I'm so glad, but that idiot Jimmy told me over the phone that he was sending Gerald along with the car. It's awfully sporting of you to come. I've been dying to meet you. Remember, I haven't seen you since I was 6 years old. I see you've got the necklace all right. Shove it in your pocket again. The village policeman might come along and see it. Brr, it's cold as ice waiting here. Let me get in." As though in a dream, Edward opened the door, and she sprang lightly in beside him. Her furs swept his cheek, and an elusive scent, like that of violets after rain, assailed his nostrils. He had no plan, no definite thought even. In a minute, without conscious volition, he had yielded himself to the adventure. She had called him Edward. What mattered if he were the wrong Edward? She would find him out soon enough. In the meantime, let the game go on. He let in the clutch, and they glided off. Presently the girl laughed. Her laugh was just as wonderful as the rest of her. "It's easy to see you don't know much about cars. I suppose they don't have them out there." I wonder where out there is, thought Edward. Aloud he said, Not much. Better let me drive, said the girl. It's tricky work finding a way round these lanes, until we get on the main road again. He relinquished his place to her gladly. Presently they were humming through the night at a pace with a recklessness that secretly appalled Edward. She turned her head towards him. I like pace. Don't you? You know, you're not a bit like Gerald. No one would ever take you to be brothers. You're not a bit like what I imagined either. I suppose, said Edward, that I'm so completely ordinary, is that it? Not ordinary. Different. I can't make you out. How's poor old Jimmy? Very fed up, I suppose. Oh, Jimmy's all right, said Edward. Oh, it's easy enough to say that. But it's rough luck on him, having a sprained ankle. Did he tell you the whole story? Not a word. I'm completely in the dark. I wish you'd enlighten me. Oh, the thing worked like a dream. Jimmy went in at the front door, tucked up in his girl's clothes. I gave him a minute or two and then shinned up to the window. Agnes Lorella's maid was there, laying out Agnes's dress and jewels and all the rest. Then there was a great yell downstairs and the squib went off, and everyone shouted fire. The maid dashed out and I hopped in, helped myself to the necklace, and was out and down in a flash, out of the place by the back way across the punch bowl. I shoved the necklace and the notice where to pick me up in the pocket of the car in passing. Then I joined Louise at the hotel, having shed my snow boots, of course. Perfect alibi for me. She'd no idea I'd been out at all. And what about Jimmy? Well, you know more about that than I do. Oh, he didn't tell me anything, said Edward easily. Well, in the general rag, he caught his foot in his skirt and managed to sprain it. They had to carry him to the car, and the Lorella's chauffeur drove him home. Just fancy if the chauffeur had happened to put his hand in the pocket. Edward laughed with her, but his mind was busy. He understood the position more or less now. The name of Lorella was vaguely familiar to him. It was a name that spelled wealth. This girl and an unknown man called Jimmy had conspired together to steal the necklace, and had succeeded. Owing to his sprained ankle and the presence of the Lorella's chauffeur, Jimmy had not been able to look in the pocket of the car before telephoning to the girl. Probably had had no wish to do so, but it was almost certain that the other unknown Gerald would do so at any early opportunity, and in it he would find Edward's muffler. Good going, said the girl. A tram flashed past them. They were on the outskirts of London. They flashed in and out of the traffic. Edward's heart stood in his mouth. She was a wonderful driver, this girl, but she took risks. A quarter of an hour later, they drew up before an imposing house in a frigid square. We can shed some of our clothing here, said the girl, before we go to Ritson's. Ritson's? Queried Edward. He mentioned the famous nightclub almost reverently. Yes, didn't Gerald tell you? He did not, said Edward grimly. What about my clothes? She frowned. Didn't they tell you anything? We'll rig you up somehow. We've got to carry this through. A stately butler opened the door and stood aside to let them enter. Mr. Gerald Champneys rang up, your ladyship. He was very anxious to speak to you, but he wouldn't leave a message. I bet he was anxious to speak to her, said Edward to himself. At any rate, I know my full name now. Edward Champneys. But who is he? Your ladyship, they called her. What does she want to steal a necklace for? Bridge debts? In the feuilleton which he occasionally read, the beautiful and titled heroine was always driven desperate by bridge debts. Edward was led away by the stately butler and delivered over to a smooth-mannered valet. A quarter of an hour later he rejoined his hostess in the hall, exquisitely attired in evening clothes made in Savile Row which fitted him to a nicety. Heavens! What a night, thought Edward. They drove in the car to the famous Ritson's. In common with everyone else, Edward had read scandalous paragraphs concerning Ritson's. Anyone who was anyone turned up at Ritson's sooner or later. Edward's only fear was that someone who knew the real Edward Champneys might turn up. He consoled himself by the reflection that the real man had evidently been out of England for some years. Sitting at a little table against the wall, they sipped cocktails. Cocktails. To the simple Edward, they represented the quintessence of the fast life. The girl, wrapped in a wonderful embroidered shawl, sipped nonchalantly. Suddenly, she dropped the shawl from her shoulders and rose. "Let's dance." Now, the one thing that Edward could do to perfection was to dance. When he and Maud took the floor together at the Palais de Danse, lesser lights stood still and watched in admiration. "Oh, I nearly forgot," said the girl suddenly. "The necklace?" She held out her hand. Edward, completely bewildered, drew it from his pocket and gave it to her. To his utter amazement, she coolly clasped it round her neck. Then she smiled up at him, intoxicatingly. "Now," she said softly, "we'll dance." They danced, and in all Ritson's nothing more perfect could be seen. Then, as at length they returned to their table, an old gentleman with a would-be rakish air accosted Edward's companion. "Ah, Lady Noreen! Always dancing! Yes, yes. Is Captain Folliot here tonight?" "Jimmy's taken a toss. Racked his ankle." "Oh, you don't say so! How did that happen?" "No details as yet." She laughed and passed on. Edward followed, his brain in a whirl. He knew now. Lady Noreen Elliot, the famous Lady Noreen herself, perhaps the most talked-of girl in England, celebrated for her beauty, for her daring, the leader of that set known as the Bright Young People. Her engagement to Captain James Folliot, V.C. of the Household Cavalry, had been recently announced. But the necklace. He still couldn't understand the necklace. He must risk giving himself away, but no, he must. As they sat down again, he pointed to it. "Why that, Noreen?" he said. "Tell me why." She smiled dreamily, her eyes far away, the spell of the dance still holding her. "It's difficult for you to understand, I suppose. One gets so tired of the same thing, always the same thing. Treasure hunts were all very well for a while, but one gets used to everything. Burglaries were my idea. £50 entrance fee, and lots to be drawn. This is the third. Jimmy and I drew Agnes Lorella. You know the rules. Burglary to be carried out within 3 days, and the loot to be worn for at least an hour in a public place, or you forfeit your stake and £100 fine. It's rough luck on Jimmy spraining his ankle, but we'll scoop the pool all right." "I see," said Edward, drawing a deep breath. "I see." Noreen rose suddenly, pulling her shawl round her. "Drive me somewhere in the car, down to the docks, somewhere horrible and exciting. Wait a minute." She reached up and unclasped the diamonds from her neck. "You better take these again. I don't want to be murdered for them." They went out of Ritson's together. The car stood in a small by-street, narrow and dark. As they turned the corner towards it, another car drew up to the curb, and a young man sprang out. "Oh, thank the Lord, Noreen! I've got hold of you at last!" he cried. "There's the devil to pay. That ass Jimmy got off with the wrong car. God knows where those diamonds are at this minute. We're in the devil of a mess." Lady Noreen stared at him. "What do you mean? We've got the diamonds. At least Edward has." "Edward?" "Yes." She made a slight gesture to indicate the figure by her side. "It's I who am in the devil of a mess," thought Edward. 10 to 1, this is brother Gerald." The young man stared at him. "What do you mean?" he said slowly. "Edward's in Scotland." "Oh," cried the girl. She stared at Edward. "Oh!" Her colour came and went. "So you," she said in a low voice, "are the real thing." It took Edward just 1 minute to grasp the situation. There was awe in the girl's eyes. Was it? Could it be admiration? Should he explain? Nothing so tame. He would play up to the end. He bowed ceremoniously. "I have to thank you, Lady Noreen," he said, in his best highwayman manner, "for a most delightful evening." He cast a quick look at the car from which the other had just alighted. A scarlet car, with a shining bonnet. His car. "And I will wish you good evening." One quick spring and he was inside, his foot on the clutch. The car started forward. Gerald stood paralysed, but the girl was quicker. As the car slid past, she leapt for it, alighting on the running board. The car swerved, shot blindly round the corner and pulled up. Noreen, still panting from her spring, laid her hand on Edward's arm. "You must give it to me! Oh, you must give it to me! I've got to return it to Agnes Lorella. Oh, be a sport. We've had a good evening together. We've danced. We've been pals. Won't you give it to me? To me? A woman who intoxicated you with her beauty. There were such women then. Also, Edward was only too anxious to get rid of the necklace. It was a heaven-sent opportunity for a beau geste. He took it from his pocket and dropped it into her outstretched hand. "We've been pals," he said. "Ah!" Her eyes smouldered, lit up. Then, surprisingly, she bent her head to him. For a moment he held her, her lips against his. Then she jumped off. The scarlet car sped forward with a great leap. Romance. Adventure. At 12 o'clock on Christmas Day, Edward Robinson strode into the tiny drawing-room of a house in Clapham with the customary greeting of Merry Christmas. Maud, who was rearranging a piece of holly, greeted him coldly. "Have a good day in the country with that friend of yours?" she inquired. "Look here," said Edward. "That was a lie, I told you. I won a competition, £500, and I bought a car with it. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd kick up a row about it. That's the first thing. I bought a car, and there's nothing more to be said about it. The second thing is, I'm not going to hang about for years. My prospects are quite good enough, and I mean to marry you next month, see?" "Oh," said Maud faintly. Could this be Edward, speaking in this masterful fashion? "Will you?" said Edward. "Yes or no?" She gazed at him, fascinated. There was awe and admiration in her eyes, and the sight of that look was intoxicating to Edward. Gone was that patient motherliness which had roused him to exasperation. So had the Lady Noreen looked at him last night. But the Lady Noreen had receded far away, right into the region of romance, side by side with the Marchesa Bianca. This was the real thing. This was his woman. "Yes or no?" he repeated, and drew a step nearer. "Yes," faltered Maud. "But oh, Edward, what has happened to you? You're quite different today." "Yes," said Edward. "For 24 hours I've been a man instead of a worm, and by God it pays." He caught her in his arms, almost as Bill the Superman might have done. "Do you love me, Maud? Tell me. Do you love me?" "Oh, Edward," breathed Maud, "I adore you."
The Fourth Man. Canon Parfitt panted a little. Running for trains was not much of a business for a man of his age. For one thing, his figure was not what it was, and with the loss of his slender silhouette went an increasing tendency to be short of breath. This tendency the canon himself always referred to with dignity as "my heart, you know." He sank into the corner of the first-class carriage with a sigh of relief. The warmth of the heated carriage was most agreeable to him. Outside, the snow was falling. Lucky to get a corner seat on a long night journey. Miserable business if you didn't. There ought to be a sleeper on this train. The other 3 corners were already occupied, and noting this fact, Canon Parfitt became aware that the man in the far corner was smiling at him in gentle recognition. He was a clean-shaven man with a quizzical face and hair just turning grey on the temples. His profession was so clearly the law that no one could have mistaken him for anything else for a moment. Sir George Durand was indeed a very famous lawyer. "Well, Parfitt," he remarked genially, "you had a run for it, didn't you?" "Very bad for my heart, I'm afraid," said the canon. "Quite a coincidence meeting you, Sir George. Are you going far north?" "Newcastle," said Sir George laconically. "By the way," he said, "do you know Dr. Campbell Clark?" The man sitting on the same side of the carriage as the canon inclined his head pleasantly. "We met on the platform," continued the lawyer. "Another coincidence." Canon Parfitt looked at Dr. Campbell Clark with a good deal of interest. It was a name of which he had often heard. Dr. Clark was in the forefront as a physician and mental specialist, and his last book, The Problem of the Unconscious Mind, had been the most discussed book of the year. Canon Parfitt saw a square jaw, very steady blue eyes, and reddish hair untouched by grey, but thinning rapidly, and he received also the impression of a very forceful personality. By a perfectly natural association of ideas, the canon looked across to the seat opposite him, half expecting to receive a glance of recognition there also, but the fourth occupant of the carriage proved to be a total stranger, a foreigner, the canon fancied. He was a slight, dark man, rather insignificant in appearance. Huddled in a big overcoat, he appeared to be fast asleep. "Canon Parfitt of Bradchester?" inquired Dr. Campbell Clark in a pleasant voice. The canon looked flattered. Those scientific sermons of his had really made a great hit, especially since the press had taken them up. Well, that was what the church needed, good, modern, up-to-date stuff. "I have read your book with great interest, Dr. Campbell Clark," he said, "though it's a bit technical here and there for me to follow." Durand broke in. "Are you for talking or sleeping, Canon?" he asked. "I confess at once that I suffer from insomnia, and that therefore I am in favour of the former." "Oh, certainly, by all means," said the canon. "I seldom sleep on these night journeys, and the book I have with me is a very dull one." "We are, at any rate, a representative gathering," remarked the doctor with a smile. "The church, the law, the medical profession." "Not much we couldn't give an opinion on between us, laughed Durand. "The church for the spiritual view, myself for the purely worldly and legal view, and you, doctor, with widest field of all, ranging from the purely pathological to the super-psychological. Between us three we should cover any ground pretty completely, I fancy." "Not so completely as you imagine, I think," said Dr. Clark. "There's another point of view, you know, that you left out. That's rather an important one." "Meaning?" queried the lawyer. "The point of view of the man in the street." "Is that so important? Isn't the man in the street usually wrong?" "Oh, almost always. But he has the thing that all expert opinion must lack, the personal point of view. In the end, you know, you can't get away from personal relationships. I've found that in my profession. For every patient who comes to me genuinely ill, at least 5 come who have nothing whatever the matter with them except an inability to live happily with the inmates of the same house. They call it everything from housemaid's knee to writer's cramp, but it's all the same thing. The raw surface produced by mind rubbing against mind." "You have a lot of patients with nerves, I suppose," the canon remarked disparagingly. His own nerves were excellent. "Ah, and what do you mean by that?" The other swung round on him quick as a flash. "Nerves. People use that word and laugh after it just as you did. Nothing the matter with so-and-so, they say. Just nerves. But good God, man, you've got the crux of everything there. You can get at a mere bodily ailment and heal it. But at this day, we know very little more about the obscure causes of the 101 forms of nervous disease than we did in, well, the reign of Queen Elizabeth." "Dear me," said Canon Parfitt, a little bewildered by this onslaught. "Is that so?" "Mind you, it's a sign of grace," Dr. Campbell Clark went on. "In the old days we considered man a simple animal, body and soul, with stress laid on the former. Body, soul, and spirit," corrected the clergyman mildly. "Spirit?" The doctor smiled oddly. "What do you parsons mean exactly by spirit? You've never been very clear about it, you know. All down the ages you've funked an exact definition." The canon cleared his throat in preparation for speech, but to his chagrin he was given no opportunity. The doctor went on. "Are we even sure the word is spirit? Might it not be spirits?" Spirits? Sir George Durand questioned, his eyebrows raised quizzically. Yes. Campbell Clark's gaze transferred itself to him. He leaned forward and tapped the other man lightly on the breast. Are you so sure, he said gravely, that there is only one occupant of this structure, for that is all it is, you know, this desirable residence to be let furnished for 7, 21, 41, 71, whatever it may be, years? And in the end, the tenant moves his things out little by little, and then goes out of the house altogether, and down comes the house, a mass of ruin and decay. You're the master of the house, we'll admit that, but aren't you ever conscious of the presence of others, soft-footed servants hardly noticed, except for the work they do, work that you are not conscious of having done? Or friends, moods, that take hold of you and make you, for the time being, a different man, as the saying goes? You're the king of the castle, right enough, but be very sure the dirty rascal is there too. My dear Clark, drawled the lawyer, you make me positively uncomfortable. Is my mind really a battleground of conflicting personalities? Is that science's latest? It was the doctor's turn to shrug his shoulders. Your body is, he said dryly. If the body, why not the mind? Very interesting, said Canon Parfitt. Ah, wonderful science, wonderful science. And inwardly he thought to himself, I can get a most interesting sermon out of that idea. But Dr. Campbell Clark had leant back in his seat, his momentary excitement spent. As a matter of fact, he remarked in a dry professional manner, it is a case of dual personality that takes me to Newcastle tonight. Very interesting case. Neurotic subject, of course, but quite genuine. Dual personality, said Sir George Durand thoughtfully. It's not so very rare, I believe. There's loss of memory as well, isn't there? I know the matter cropped up in a case in the probate court the other day. Dr. Clark nodded. The classic case, of course, he said, was that of Félicie Beau. You may remember hearing of it. Of course, said Canon Parfitt. I remember reading about it in the papers, but quite a long time ago. 7 years, at least. Dr. Campbell Clark nodded. That girl became one of the most famous figures in France. Scientists from all over the world came to see her. She had no less than 4 distinct personalities. They were known as Félicie I, Félicie II, Félicie III, etc. Wasn't there some suggestion of deliberate trickery? Asked Sir George alertly. The personalities of Félicie III and Félicie IV were a little open to doubt, admitted the doctor, but the main facts remain. Félicie Beau was a Brittany peasant girl. She was the 3rd of a family of 5, the daughter of a drunken father and a mentally defective mother. In one of his drinking bouts, the father strangled the mother and was, if I remember rightly, transported for life. Félicie was then 5 years of age. Some charitable people interested themselves in the children, and Félicie was brought up and educated by an English maiden lady who had a kind of home for destitute children. She could make very little of Félicie, however. She describes the girl as abnormally slow and stupid, only taught to read and write with the greatest difficulty and clumsy with her hands. This lady, Miss Slater, tried to fit the girl for domestic service, and did indeed find her several places when she was of an age to take them, but she never stayed long anywhere, owing to her stupidity and also her intense laziness. The doctor paused for a minute, and the canon, recrossing his legs and arranging his travelling rug more closely round him, was suddenly aware that the man opposite him had moved very slightly. His eyes, which had formerly been shut, were now open, and something in them, something mocking and indefinable, startled the worthy canon. It was as though the man was listening and gloating secretly over what he heard. "There is a photograph taken of Félicie Beau at the age of 17, continued the doctor. "It shows her as a loutish peasant girl, heavy of build. There is nothing in that picture to indicate that she was soon to be one of the most famous persons in France." 5 years later, when she was 22, Félicie Beau had a severe nervous illness, and on recovery, the strange phenomena began to manifest themselves. The following are facts attested to by many eminent scientists. The personality called Félicie I was undistinguishable from the Félicie Beau of the last 22 years. Félicie I wrote French, badly and haltingly. She spoke no foreign languages and was unable to play the piano. Félicie II, on the contrary, spoke Italian fluently and German moderately. Her handwriting was quite dissimilar to that of Félicie I, and she wrote fluent and expressive French. She could discuss politics and art, and she was passionately fond of playing the piano. Félicie III had many points in common with Félicie II. She was intelligent and apparently well-educated, but in moral character she was a total contrast. She appeared, in fact, an utterly depraved creature, but depraved in a Parisian and not a provincial way. She knew all the Paris argot and the expressions of the chic demi-monde. Her language was filthy, and she would rail against religion and so-called good people in the most blasphemous terms. Finally, there was Félicie IV, a dreamy, almost half-witted creature, distinctly pious and professedly clairvoyant. But this fourth personality was very unsatisfactory and elusive, and has been sometimes thought to be a deliberate trickery on the part of Félicie III, a kind of joke played by her on a credulous public. I may say that with the possible exception of Félicie IV, each personality was distinct and separate and had no knowledge of the others. Félicie II was undoubtedly the most predominant and would last sometimes for a fortnight at a time. Then Félicie I would appear abruptly for a day or two. After that, perhaps Félicie III or IV, but the two latter seldom remained in command for more than a few hours. Each change was accompanied by severe headache and heavy sleep, and in each case there was complete loss of memory of the other states, the personality in question taking up life where she had left it, unconscious of the passage of time. "Remarkable," murmured the canon. "Very remarkable. As yet we know next to nothing of the marvels of the universe." "We know that there are some very astute impostors in it," remarked the lawyer dryly. The case of Félicie Beau was investigated by lawyers as well as by doctors and scientists, said Dr. Campbell Clark quickly. Maître Quimbellier, you remember, made the most thorough investigation and confirmed the views of the scientists. And after all, why should it surprise us so much? We come across the double-yolked egg, do we not? And the twin banana? Why not the double soul in the single body? The double soul, protested the canon. Dr. Campbell Clark turned his piercing blue eyes on him. What else can we call it? That is to say, if the personality is the soul. It's a good thing such a state of affairs is only in the nature of a freak, remarked Sir George. If the case were common, it would give rise to pretty complications. The condition is, of course, quite abnormal, agreed the doctor. It was a great pity that a longer study could not have been made, but all that was put an end to by Félicie's unexpected death. There was something queer about that, if I remember rightly, said the lawyer slowly. Dr. Campbell Clark nodded. A most unaccountable business. The girl was found one morning dead in bed. She had clearly been strangled, but to everyone's stupefaction it was presently proved beyond doubt that she had actually strangled herself. The marks on her neck were those of her own fingers. A method of suicide which, though not physically impossible, must have necessitated terrific muscular strength and almost superhuman willpower. What had driven the girl to such straits has never been found out. Of course, her mental balance must always have been precarious. Still, there it is. The curtain has been rung down forever on the mystery of Félicie Beau. It was then that the man in the far corner laughed. The other 3 men jumped, as though shot. They'd totally forgotten the existence of the 4th amongst them. As they stared towards the place where he sat, still huddled in his overcoat, he laughed again. "You must excuse me, gentlemen," he said in perfect English that had nevertheless a foreign flavour. He sat up, displaying a pale face with a small jet-black moustache. "Yes, you must excuse me," he said with a mock bow. "But really, in science, is the last word ever said?" "You know something of the case we have been discussing?" asked the doctor courteously. "Of the case? No. But I knew her." "Félicie Beau?" "Yes, and Annette Ravel also. You have not heard of Annette Ravel, I see. And yet the story of the one is the story of the other. Believe me, you know nothing of Félicie Beau, if you do not also know the history of Annette Ravel." He drew out his watch and looked at it. "Just half an hour before the next stop. I have time to tell you the story. That is, if you care to hear it." "Please tell it to us," said the doctor quietly. "Delighted," said the Canon. "Delighted." Sir George Durand merely composed himself in an attitude of keen attention. "My name, gentlemen," began their strange travelling companion, "is Raoul Letardeau. You have spoken just now of an English lady, Miss Slater, who interested herself in works of charity. I was born in that Brittany fishing village, and when my parents were both killed in a railway accident, it was Miss Slater who came to the rescue and saved me from the equivalent of your English workhouse. There were some 20 children under her care, girls and boys. Amongst these children were Félicie Beau and Annette Ravel. If I cannot make you understand the personality of Annette, gentlemen, you will understand nothing. She was the child of what you call a fille de joie, who had died of consumption, abandoned by her lover. The mother had been a dancer, and Annette, too, had the desire to dance. When I saw her first, she was 11 years old, a little shrimp of a thing with eyes that alternately mocked and promised, a little creature all fire and life. And at once, yes, at once, she made me her slave. It was, Raoul, do this for me. Raoul, do that for me. And me, I obeyed. Already I worshipped her, and she knew it. We would go down to the shore together, we 3, for Félicie would come with us. And there Annette would pull off her shoes and stockings and dance on the sand. And then, when she sank down breathless, she would tell us of what she meant to do and to be. See you? I shall be famous. Yes, exceedingly famous. I will have hundreds and thousands of silk stockings, the finest silk, and I shall live in an exquisite apartment. All my lovers shall be young and handsome, as well as being rich, and when I dance, all Paris shall come to see me. They will yell and call and shout and go mad over my dancing, and in the winters I shall not dance. I shall go south to the sunlight. There are villas there with orange trees. I shall have one of them. I shall lie in the sun on silk cushions eating oranges. As for you, Raoul, I will never forget you, however rich and famous I shall be. I will protect you and advance your career. Félicie here shall be my maid. No. Her hands are too clumsy. Look at them, how large and coarse they are. Félicie would grow angry at that, and then Annette would go on teasing her. She is so ladylike, Félicie, so elegant, so refined. She's a princess in disguise. My mother and father were married, which is more than yours were. Félicie would growl out spitefully. Yes, and your father killed your mother, a pretty thing to be a murderer's daughter. Your father left your mother to rot, Félicie would rejoin. Ah, yes, Annette became thoughtful. Pauvre maman. One must keep strong and well. It is everything to keep strong and well. I'm as strong as a horse, Félicie boasted. And indeed she was. She had twice the strength of any other girl in the home, and she was never ill. But she was stupid, you comprehend. Stupid, like a brute beast. I often wondered why she followed Annette round as she did. It was with her a kind of fascination. Sometimes I think she actually hated Annette, and indeed Annette was not kind to her. She jeered at her slowness and stupidity, and baited her in front of the others. I have seen Félicie go quite white with rage. Sometimes I have thought that she would fasten her fingers round Annette's neck and choke the life out of her. She was not nimble-witted enough to reply to Annette's taunts, but she did learn in time to make one retort which never failed. That was a reference to her own health and strength. She had learned what I had always known, that Annette envied her strong physique, and she struck instinctively at the weak spot in her enemy's armor. One day, Annette came to me in great glee. "Raoul," she said, "we shall have fun today with that stupid Félicie. We shall die of laughing. What are you going to do? Come behind the little shade and I will tell you." It seemed that Annette had got hold of some book. Part of it she did not understand, and indeed the whole thing was much over her head. It was an early work on hypnotism. "A bright object," they say. "The brass knob of my bed, it twirls round. I made Félicie look at it last night. 'Look at it steadily,' I said. 'Do not take your eyes off it.' And then I twirled it, Raoul. I was frightened. Her eyes looked so queer, so queer. 'Félicie, you will do what I say always,' I said. 'I will do what you say always, Annette,' she answered. And then, I said, 'Tomorrow you will bring a tallow candle out into the playground at 12 o'clock and start to eat it. And if anyone asks you, you will say that it is the best galette you ever tasted.'" "Oh, Raoul, think of it." "But she'll never do such a thing," I objected. "The book says so." "Not that I can quite believe it, but, oh, Raoul, if the book is all true, how we shall amuse ourselves." I, too, thought the idea very funny. We passed word around to the comrades, and at 12 o'clock we were all in the playground, punctual to the minute. Out came Félicie with a stump of candle in her hand. "Will you believe me, monsieur?" she began solemnly to nibble at it. We were all in hysterics. Every now and then one or other of the children would go up to her and say solemnly, "It is good what you eat there, eh, Félicie?" And she would answer, "But yes, it is the best galette I ever tasted." And then we would shriek with laughter. We laughed at last so loud that the noise seemed to wake up Félicie to a realization of what she was doing. She blinked her eyes in a puzzled way, looked at the candle, then at us. She passed her hand over her forehead. "But what is it that I do here?" she muttered. "You are eating a candle," we screamed. "I made you do it! I made you do it!" cried Annette, dancing about. Félicie stared for a moment. Then she went slowly up to Annette. "So it is you. It is you who have made me ridiculous. I seem to remember. I will kill you for this." She spoke in a very quiet tone, but Annette rushed suddenly away and hid behind me. "Save me, Raoul. I'm afraid of Félicie. It was only a joke, Félicie. Oh, only a joke." "I do not like these jokes," said Félicie. "You understand? I hate you. I hate you all." She suddenly burst out crying and rushed away. Annette was, I think, scared by the result of her experiment and did not try to repeat it. But from that day on, her ascendancy over Félicie seemed to grow stronger. Félicie, I now believe, always hated her, but nevertheless she could not keep away from her. She used to follow Annette around like a dog. Soon after that, monsieur, employment was found for me, and I only came to the home for occasional holidays. Annette's desire to become a dancer was not taken seriously, but she developed a very pretty singing voice as she grew older, and Miss Slater consented to her being trained as a singer. She was not lazy, Annette. She worked feverishly, without rest. Miss Slater was obliged to prevent her doing too much. She spoke to me once about her. "You've always been fond of Annette," she said. "Persuade her not to work too hard. She has a little cough lately that I do not like. My work took me far afield soon afterwards. I received 1 or 2 letters from Annette at first, but then came silence. For 5 years after that, I was abroad. Quite by chance, when I returned to Paris, my attention was caught by a poster advertising Annette Ravelli with a picture of the lady. I recognized her at once. That night, I went to the theatre in question. Annette sang in French and Italian. On the stage, she was wonderful. Afterwards, I went to her dressing room. She received me at once. "Why, Raoul," she cried, stretching out her whitened hands to me. "This is splendid. Where have you been all these years?" I would have told her, but she did not really want to listen. "You see, I have very nearly arrived." She waved a triumphant hand round the room filled with bouquets. "The good Miss Slater must be proud of your success." "That old one? No, indeed. She designed me, you know, for the conservatoire. Decorous concert singing, but me, I am an artist. It is here on the variety stage that I can express myself." Just then, a handsome middle-aged man came in. He was very distinguished. By his manner, I soon saw that he was Annette's protector. He looked sideways at me, and Annette explained, "A friend of my infancy. He passes through Paris, sees my picture on a poster, and voila!" The man was then very affable and courteous. In my presence, he produced a ruby and diamond bracelet and clasped it on Annette's wrist. As I rose to go, she threw me a glance of triumph and a whisper, "I arrive, do I not? You see, all the world is before me." But as I left the room, I heard her cough, a sharp, dry cough. I knew what it meant, that cough. It was the legacy of her consumptive mother. I saw her next 2 years later. She had gone for refuge to Miss Slater. Her career had broken down. She was in a state of advanced consumption for which the doctors said nothing could be done. I shall never forget her as I saw her then. She was lying in a kind of shelter in the garden. She was kept outdoors, night and day. Her cheeks were hollow and flushed, her eyes bright and feverish, and she coughed repeatedly. She greeted me with a kind of desperation that startled me. It's good. It's good to see you, Raoul. You know what they say, that I may not get well? They say it behind my back, you understand. To me, they are soothing and consolatory, but it is not true, Raoul. It is not true. I shall not permit myself to die. Die with beautiful life stretching in front of me. It is the will to live that matters. All the great doctors say that nowadays. I am not one of the feeble ones who let go. Already I feel myself infinitely better. Infinitely better. Do you... Do you hear? She raised herself on her elbow to drive her words home, then fell back, attacked by a fit of coughing that racked her thin body. The cough! The cough! The cough! It is nothing, she gasped. And hemorrhages do not frighten me. I shall surprise the doctors. It is the will that counts. Remember, Raoul, I am going to live. It was pitiful, you understand. Pitiful. Just then, Félicie Beau came out with a tray. A glass of hot milk. She gave it to Annette and watched her drink it with an expression that I could not fathom. There was a kind of smug satisfaction in it. Annette, too, caught the look. She flung the glass down angrily, so that it smashed to bits. "You see her! That is how she always looks at me. She is glad I am going to die. Yes, she gloats over it. She who is well and strong. Look at her! Never a day's illness, that one, and all for nothing! What good is that great carcass of hers to her? What can she make of it?" Felicie stooped and picked up the broken fragments of glass. "I do not mind what she says," she observed in a sing-song voice. "What does it matter? I am a respectable girl, I am. As for her, she will be knowing the fires of purgatory before very long. I am a Christian. I say nothing." "You hate me?" cried Annette. "You have always hated me. But I can charm you all the same. I can make you do what I want. See, now, if I ask you to, you would go down on your knees before me. Now on the grass." "You are absurd," said Felicie uneasily. But yes, you will do it. You will, to please me. Down on your knees. I ask it of you, I, Annette. Down on your knees, Felicie." Whether it was the wonderful pleading in the voice or some deeper motive, Felicie obeyed. She sank slowly to her knees, her arms spread wide, her face vacant and stupid. Annette flung her head back and laughed, peal upon peal of laughter. "Look at her! With her stupid face! How ridiculous she looks!" You can get up now, Felicie. Thank you. It is of no use to scowl at me. I am your mistress. You have to do what I say. She lay back on her pillows, exhausted. Felicie picked up the tray and moved slowly away. Once she looked back over her shoulder, and the smouldering resentment in her eyes startled me. I was not there when Annette died, but it was terrible, it seems. She clung to life. She fought against death like a mad woman. Again and again she gasped out, "I will not die, do you hear me? I will not die. I will live, live." Miss Slater told me all this when I came to see her 6 months later. "My poor Raoul," she said kindly. "You loved her, did you not?" "Always. Always. But of what use could I be to her? Let us not talk of it. She is dead. She, so brilliant, so full of burning life." Miss Slater was a sympathetic woman. She went on to talk of other things. She was very worried about Felicie, so she told me. The girl had had a queer sort of nervous breakdown, and ever since she had been very strange in manner. "You know," said Miss Slater after a momentary hesitation, "that she is learning the piano." I did not know it, and was very much surprised to hear it. Felicie learning the piano? I would have declared the girl would not know one note from another. "She has talent, they say," continued Miss Slater. "I can't understand it. I've always put her down as, well, Raoul, you know yourself, she was always a stupid girl." I nodded. "She is so strange in her manner sometimes. I really don't know what to make of it." A few minutes later, I entered the salle de lecture. Felicie was playing the piano. She was playing the air that I had heard Annette sing in Paris. You understand, monsieur, it gave me quite a turn. And then, hearing me, she broke off suddenly and looked round at me, her eyes full of mockery and intelligence. For a moment I thought, well, I will not tell you what I thought. "Tiens," she said, "so it is you, Monsieur Raoul." I cannot describe the way she said it. To Annette I had never ceased to be Raoul, But Félicie, since we had met as grown-ups, always addressed me as Monsieur Raoul, but the way she said it now was different, as though the monsieur, slightly stressed, was somehow very amusing. "Why, Félicie," I stammered, "you look quite different today." "Do I?" she said reflectively. "It's odd, that. But do not be so solemn. Raoul, decidedly, I shall call you Raoul. Did we not play together as children? Life was made for laughter. Let us talk of the poor Annette, she who is dead and buried. Is she in purgatory, I wonder? Or where?" And she hummed a snatch of song, untunefully enough, but the words caught my attention. "Félicie," I cried, "you speak Italian?" "Why not, Raoul? I'm not as stupid as I pretend to be, perhaps." She laughed at my mystification. "I don't understand," I began, "but I will tell you. I am a very fine actress, though no one suspects it. I can play many parts, and play them very well." She laughed again and ran quickly out of the room before I could stop her. I saw her again before I left. She was asleep in an armchair. She was snoring heavily. I stood and watched her, fascinated yet repelled. Suddenly she woke with a start. Her eyes, dull and lifeless, met mine. "Monsieur Raoul," she muttered mechanically. "Yes, Félicie, I'm going now. Will you play to me again before I go?" "I? Play? You are laughing at me, Monsieur Raoul. Don't you remember playing to me this morning?" She shook her head. "I play? How can a poor girl like me play?" She paused for a minute, as though in thought, then beckoned me nearer. "Monsieur Raoul, there are strange things going on in this house. They play tricks upon you. They alter the clocks. Oh, yes, I know what I'm saying. And it is all her doing." "Whose doing?" I asked, startled. "That Annette's, that wicked one's. When she was alive, she always tormented me. Now that she is dead, she comes back from the dead to torment me." I stared at Félicie. I could see now that she was in an extremity of terror, her eyes staring from her head. "She's bad, that one. She's bad, I tell you. She would take the bread from your mouth, the clothes from your back, the soul from your body." She clutched me suddenly. "I'm afraid, I tell you. Afraid. I hear her voice. Not in my ear. No, not in my ear. Here, in my head." She tapped her forehead. "She will drive me away altogether. And then what shall I do? What will become of me?" Her voice rose almost to a shriek. She had in her eyes the look of the terrified brute beast at bay. Suddenly she smiled, a peasant smile full of cunning, with something in it that made me shiver. "If it should come to it, Monsieur Raoul, I am very strong with my hands, very strong with my hands." I had never noticed her hands particularly before. I looked at them now and shuddered in spite of myself. Squat, brutal fingers, and as Félicie had said, terribly strong. I cannot explain to you the nausea that swept over me. With hands such as these, her father must have strangled her mother. That was the last time I ever saw Félicie Beau. Immediately afterwards, I went abroad to South America. I returned from there 2 years after her death. Something I had read in the newspapers of her life and sudden death. I have heard fuller details tonight from you, gentlemen. Félicie 3 and Félicie 4. I wonder. She was a good actress, you know. The train suddenly slackened speed. The man in the corner sat erect and buttoned his overcoat more closely. "What is your theory?" asked the lawyer, leaning forward. "I can hardly believe," began Canon Parfitt and stopped. The doctor said nothing. He was gazing steadily at Raoul Lepardo. "The clothes from your back, the soul from your body," quoted the Frenchman lightly. He stood up. "I say to you, messieurs, that the history of Félicie Beau is the history of Annette Ravel. You did not know her, gentlemen. I did. She was very fond of life." His hand on the door, ready to spring out, he turned suddenly and, bending down, tapped Canon Parfitt on the chest. "Monsieur le Docteur, over there, he said just now that all this," his hand smote the canon's stomach, and the canon winced, "was only a residence. Tell me, if you find a burglar in your house, what do you do? Shoot him, do you not?" "No, no," cried the canon. "No, indeed. I mean, not in this country." But he spoke the last words to empty air. The carriage door banged. The clergyman, the lawyer, and the doctor were alone. The fourth corner was vacant.